Well, hello everyone. Thanks for coming. Okay, let's start. So, hi everyone. Thanks for coming to McMaster's DSC event for cracking the co-op panel. Oh, also Ariba, did you start streaming? Okay, cool. All right, so we have a lot of great panelists with us. We have 7 different panelists, so I'll honestly give the floor to them because that's who you came here to listen to. So we'll just begin with if each of the panelists can kind of introduce themselves, the program they're in at McMaster, and their past co-ops to give you a bit of an idea of what each of their experiences are. So, Fuad, would you like to go first?
Yeah, for sure. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Okay. My name's Fuad. I'm going in my 5th year of electrical and biomedical engineering. It's a 4-year program, but then I did a year of co-ops as well. So I've done a ton of different co-ops. I did my first term as a research assistant at Toronto General Hospital, and then I kind of got into coding after that. And so I've worked as an engineer for a small startup that was like at the Forge. I worked as an engineer for Publicis Sapient, which is a consulting firm that does software consulting. I worked on Walmart.ca. Then I was at Wealthsimple working on the deposits and withdrawals team. And then I was at Tesla working on the energy product software team. And then most recently I was at Twitter working on the team that like removes Trump's tweets pretty much. And I also did a data science internship as well with the CIA. So yeah, that's a little bit about me in my free time. I like to read. I have a podcast, which is why I have this huge mic. And I love SpongeBob.
All right, thank you. Salman, do you want to go next, please?
Yeah, I'm also in electrical engineering, technically class of 2020, but it keeps getting extended because of co-op. So yeah, my first co-op was at actually McMaster's Automotive Resource Center. It's down the road by Main Street, and they do a lot of vehicle research. And my first co-op was in electric vehicle research, where I did a lot of the work to help set up the drivetrain, so the battery and the inverter stuff. That was pretty electrical related type stuff, but also a good amount of project management. 2020, but it keeps getting. And the following co-op immediately after that I had was at OPG. Yeah, my first co-op was at Darlington Nuclear Station, McMaster's Automotive Resource Center, a little far down there, but it was that was project controls, so it was a lot more project management type stuff, but like finances and scheduling, and that's where I kind of actually really got into coding and scripting and programming, and helped me for my next co-op, which starts in January, and that's at University of New Brunswick, which is electric vehicle system modeling to help develop their AI for driving assistance, basically.
Cool. Tamisha?
Yeah, hi, my name is Tasmia, or Taz. So I'm in my 4th year of software engineering right now. I decided to actually take a year off and do a long-term 16-month internship at a smaller company called Embras, which focuses on self-service software like the kiosk at the airport where you can check into your flight or self-bag drop. So my role there was a software developer intern, and because the internship was so long and the company was so small, I did everything from requirements gathering to front end to back end databases and documentation. So overall, I did like 6 large projects during that time.
Okay, Akil?
Hey everybody, my name is Akil and I'm in my 3rd year of software engineering at Mac. I've done a few co-ops so far. My first one was in 1st year. I worked at TELUS as a software engineering intern. The following summer, I was working at Slack, also as a software engineering intern on the customer experience team. And then I took a year off, and then I worked at Google in the fall. And then I was on the Google Assistant machine learning infrastructure team. And then I was at Instagram or Facebook in the winter term, and I was on Instagram Insights. And then I went back to Slack for this past summer, which was remote, but again on the customer experience team. And then outside of that, I did some like internships / part-time jobs with like research at Mac, one at Oxford, and some stuff at the Forge.
Main Street, and they do a lot of
stuff
for drive.
Awesome. Awesome, thank you. Bilal?
Hey everyone, my name is
Akil?
Bilal. I'm currently in second year of software
Hey everybody,
engineering.
my name is
Before I was in
Akil, and
second
I'm in
year of
my third
mechatronics,
year
but I switched out of it just because I didn't like hardware too much. So from there, from last year's experiences, I went to a lot of hackathons and such as the classic comp sci type of student would, and I didn't take part in many clubs, but from that, a lot of experience from hackathons, I transitioned that into my first co-op, which was in Pulse Life Savings, which is a startup in at Forge in the incubator, and that was a very early startup. It was like total of like three main people other than me that were actually working there, and we were all trying to create a training program in augmented reality for CPR. Since everything in CPR is usually done in person, they're trying to just make a full training program with the Microsoft HoloLens. With So what I was specifically working on was just the CPR part of it, and I did a lot of progress on the CPR model, but obviously I couldn't finish it. And also the HoloLens didn't actually ship to us because like there was like backlogged and stuff. So other than that, it was just like it was a pretty cool first internship of mine, and I guess I'm here to help you guys just get the if you guys are looking for getting your first co-op and such and stuff like that, I'm really here to help with that.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, hi, my name's Alex. I'm in my, I would say, fifth year of computer engineering. I've worked three different co-ops. My first one was a manufacturing company in New Hamburg. Second one was 16 months at AMD in Markham. And then most recently, I worked at a startup in Toronto called Clean Slate UV. And I'll go into detail with that one a little bit. I was the embedded systems co-op for the summer, and that just involved programming the microcontroller that controlled their product and implementing a new feature and testing it and helping out other parts of the business and stuff like that.
Awesome, thanks. And last but not least, Anna.
Hi guys, I don't know if you can hear me. My Wi-Fi is not that great, but my name's Anna, and I'm in my second year of health sciences. And you might be wondering, like, health sciences, what that isn't like software engineering, which is really weird. And so essentially my story is that I've kind of been doing coding in high school, and I guess I wasn't really that passionate for it until I came to university, where I joined a few clubs. Like I joined the McMaster AI Society, and I also I wanted to do a research project essentially because I was really interested in brain health. And so I got involved as a research assistant, basically in neuroinformatics, which is an area of research that kind of combines computing as well as like neuroscience. And so as a research assistant, I had to do a lot of scripting and I had to do a lot of coding. And that kind of reignited my like passion for coding. And so that's how I got really interested in, how can I become a better software engineer? How can I, develop better coding practices? So I'd say like similar to what Fuad, sorry, I can't speak today, but similar to Fuad, I think that having a research assistantship, for your first co-op is definitely something that's attainable. And it also looks really good, especially if you're applying to like grad school or anything like this, because like profs and schools, like they really value having you having those experiences. And so after that research internship, which was essentially this summer, next summer I'm going to be interning at Microsoft as part of their Explore internship. So it's a program which is half software development and half product management. So it's a really interesting internship that will allow you to kind of dabble your, just dip your toes into both those fields. And I think it's really cool because it's given like sophomores and freshmen, which is what the program is targeted to. I think it gives those people like a really good chance at securing a really good co-op. So I'd like to encourage everyone to apply to those. And yeah, I think that's it.
All right, awesome, thank you. So that is all of our panelists, and we're going to go through some of the questions that you all have submitted to the Google form before this meeting for the first half hour. And then if you have specific questions you'd like to ask or questions for specific panelists, feel free to put them in the chat and we will ask them all at the end. So to start off, one of the first questions was what makes working at a big tech company different from working at a startup or working research or at a hardware company? So the first person we'd like to ask is Fuad.
Hey, yeah, great question. So I think a lot of things are really, really different at each of those, kind of institutions you mentioned. And I guess I can compare and contrast them on a number of metrics, but I think overall, the biggest things to consider are kind of the impact of the code that you write, the code review process and the team development process, and also just, general like vibes of the workplace, because that differs a lot depending on what company you're on. And so I kind of classify it according to those three categories, and I guess I can go through each of them. So at a research institution, I'd say vibes are pretty low. Most of the money is going to either like funding the research itself, and they're not really like a for-profit institution the same way, and most of the money's from grants, so you don't really get any of those like perks, like office perks and things like that. I would say impact is pretty high. You can have a lot of impact on the research lab that you're working on, and if it's something you're really, really passionate about and really interested in working on, that can feel really, really fulfilling. And then in terms of the code review process, typically they're much smaller teams, so you can have a lot more intimacy with the team and things like that. And it's a little bit less structured and informal in that sense. Startups are pretty similar to that too, in the sense of being a lot less structured and informal. And because you probably know a lot of people in the startup, you can get a lot of code help. And obviously this differs depending on the size of the startup. Companies as big as 300 people are called startups. When I was at WhatsApp, it was 250, and it was still a startup. But then, a 5-person startup is going to feel really, really different. Most startups have a pretty cool vibe too, because they're super young. Typically, they have like pretty good funding, unless it's like a really, really early stage startup that you're joining. And there's a lot of really cool people to learn from, and you could have mentors from like companies like Google and Facebook that have decided to join that startup as kind of like a passion project. And then finally, getting into the bigger companies, they still vary a lot. The vibe at, let's say, Amazon, for example, is very, very different from Tesla and very, very different from Twitter. And Twitter itself is very different from Tesla as well. I would say it really, really depends on the company. But, with bigger companies, I'd say sometimes people do feel like they're, kind of a cog in the machine. But that obviously depends on, what team you're working on, what kind of product you're working on, what product area you're working on. And I would say, there's pretty good vibes at a lot of these companies because they do make a lot of money, and so they can invest in their employees and like trainings and events and things like that. And then, I would say the biggest factor there is that, a lot of these bigger companies have very thorough and strict code practices. And so you can actually learn a lot in terms of writing really, really efficient and good code, and getting really, really good review on that code as well. So yeah, that's a little bit of my thoughts on it.
Great. Salman, you work specifically in hardware. So what was your perspective on what made working in that kind of field unique?
I worked at, I guess closest to hardware was at Mark, but it was a lot more like the research work. I did deal with a bit of, I'd say working in research hardware, go back. If I had to say, basically research is a lot more open-ended, because when you're working in a team on a research project, usually the problem is defined really well before you're even hired, right? You define that your job title is to do this one job. Basically, at that, like the workflow is much more in source of that. It's kind of like they're expecting you to take creative risks, and that's like a healthy development, because that's the industry, right? It's on a path to discovery and trying to find out new things. So you trying out new sorts of solutions is very much like promoted. But I would say at OPG, right, there's a nuclear industry. The really big thing they stress every single day before every meeting is safety. So safety, and what they in their workflow really like is reliability. So in terms of like working with software on that, co-op students, they come and go, but it's always anything you build, if it's going to be used by your team or your department or your section of the organization, it has to be like incredibly robust. Like it's much more forgiving in a smaller environment, where if something doesn't work out, you can repair your code, whatever it may do for you. But when you're working with like literally like millions of dollars per project, and there's like dozens of projects in a department. If you're gonna pull some metrics or use a program to like say this is the status of what's going on, it has to be like concrete. Like there's far less room for wiggle room. So like you gotta make sure it's right the first time. And like that being said, your managers also play a big part of how much freedom you have in terms of innovation. Luckily, my manager was basically like my co-op started with like me just doing things here and there to understand the workflow of what's going on. Then it kind of came to the point where I said, "Oh, hey, I think I know how to make this more efficient. Can I give it a shot?" And then throughout my spare time, doing my other tasks, that's what I did. But it came to the point where like if you show enough innovation to even an not old, probably just a very like railroad company that does things one way and that's how they like to do it. If you show the benefits of like programming and like is programming and like just like a new better ways of thinking about stuff, you can you can change you can bring a pretty big impact to like even those companies.
All right, thank you. And Tasmia, you spent, I think, 12 or 16 months at a smaller software company. So what was that experience like?
So that experience was talking off of what Fuad said. It was very different than what you would expect in a bigger company in terms of level of impact. So everything I built was used or shipped or put into production or QA tested because there were only like 6 backend software developers to begin with. So it had a high level of impact in whatever I worked on, and there were no set guidelines. So in terms of like new projects, we actually got to interact with the clients ourselves and go on business trips and actually gather the requirements. So we got to do projects fully from gathering requirements to production. You're given a lot of responsibility once again, since there's only so many developers. Sometimes you'll be the only person working on the back end or the front end, or even the entire project, so back end and front end and database, which is some of the projects that I had to do. And there are less perks, so no foosball or catered lunches. But the cool thing is that the company's small, so it feels more like a close-knit team. And we went out for lunch every day anyways as a team. So it was fun in that sense.
Awesome. Thank you. So our next question was there something that was unexpected from your co-op experience that you wish you knew before? So we'll direct that question first at Akil.
Let's see. I think it really depends on like the company that you work for. Like, I think one big thing for me was like there's a lot of like imposter syndrome when I started going down to companies in California, because like a lot of people were like, oh, it's California, everyone's like super intelligent, and like you have to like be really intimidating in the beginning. But I think you just need to like be a bit more confident in yourself and just have like faith in like the stuff that you learn at McMaster, because they do prepare you pretty well in general. So as long as like you go in with like that kind of mindset, I think it makes the experience like a lot better. Like I try not to like take into account like the opinions of like other people when I just started, and I was just trying to like gain as much experience as possible. And I think that really helped me like get started in the beginning. But also like the perks of the big companies are also really cool as well. I definitely did not expect that at all. Like especially at like Facebook, for example, they had like a lot of like intern events where you could like go on like ski trips, and like they like buy out entire like movie theaters and stuff like that, which was like really cool, and like stuff that you wouldn't really like hear typically, but you get to do some really cool stuff if you get to work at like some really nice companies. So those are like the two main things that stood out for me.
Sounds pretty cool. How about you, Bilal, working at a startup company in the past summers?
So my experience, I'll just start from the beginning. So from my interview experience, it was like I was expecting the usual technical interview with an algorithms problem, something like that. But from the start, just from the start of the whole experience, it was pretty different. So they just gave me a project to do, and the project wasn't as difficult as like a lot of hackathons things that I did, and it had almost nothing to do with data structures or algorithms or anything like that. So that first part was very surprising. But also when I started working at the startup, how unstructured everything was. Like you pretty much dictate whatever you want to do, and especially when you're like a part of a like essentially like a four-man team of developers, it's like whatever you say like can really have a large impact on how your projects and stuff go. So just how much impact you can have, and like the fact that everyone was also learning there, so it was a really good like learning experience, and how everyone goes for like achieving things in an environment that not everyone's an expert at. And also the fact that it's not a very established like field of software engineering, like augmented reality, and you need to have a lot of skills for that too, which I'll talk about a bit later. But it just it's a it was a really like interesting experience, I'll say.
That's definitely great. Working at a startup is definitely a really unique experience. So it's great that you got to experience that and let everyone know how that went for you. So our next question to the panelists was, what have you found to be the most successful way to market yourself when trying to get a job? Were there specific resources you used finding a co-op or preparing for an interview? Alexander, would you like to start us off, or Alex?
Yeah, no worries. I go by Alex. But yeah, successful ways to market yourself. I think it's probably a given, but I think your LinkedIn profile is probably a huge way to make connections and network. So what I ended up doing, I hadn't done it before this year, but this year what I would do is I would apply to a job on Oscar Plus and then message the HR person from the company on LinkedIn. And you do that like as many times as you can. You connect to as many people as you can, because you got to set yourself apart in some way. But to be successful, I would say it felt like it was more about how many job applications can you get out there, because you just need to keep going and not get discouraged by the rejections or no responses. And to prepare for an interview, I feel like that's a harder thing to prepare for. But I think just some certain companies might have a technical interview. So if you look over resources like Glassdoor, they may have information on what the interviews are like. But just really making sure you've read through your resume and you're prepared with some talking points about the stuff you've done, because sometimes they may just ask, "Tell me about your resume," and then that's the perfect opportunity to just tell them all about those talking points that you prepared. So yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. How about with you, Anna, being in health sciences and trying to get into the tech field? What did you specifically find was the best way to market yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that LinkedIn is, I think, a pretty good way to market yourself. Personally, last year I used to, like before COVID, I used to go to a bunch of networking events, and I feel like those are like a really good way to just get your name out there and make some solid connections, because a lot of people going to networking events are literally just looking for people to hire, and so you want to just meet them, show them you're a human, and just try to get information and learn what their company is like, and if they're hiring, that sort of thing. So I thought that was really useful, just to hear about like the different companies that might be hiring, and getting directed to their job boards. I think that was really helpful. In terms of specific resources I use for finding a co-op, personally, I'd have to say that like for finding a co-op, I feel that just having a good resume makes your co-op search like so much easier. So one of the things I did when I tried to find a co-op is I basically sent my resume to a bunch of other people that I knew and asked them to like basically critique it, roast it. And essentially when I asked them to like do that, I also kind of got to know them, and I also asked, about their company. And essentially one of the things I think is really important in today's like job market is trying to make more connections. So asking people that you look up to and asking your friends even just about like places that might be hiring. For example, the first research internship that I got, which was like my first co-op, I actually found that through a friend, because I said that I was really interested in this research, and you can just ask someone else, and ask them if they might know about a position that you'd be interested in. In terms of preparing for an interview, I don't know if this was said before because my Wi-Fi cut out. But I think if you're applying for like software engineering, I think cracking the coding interview or the CUT, or I don't remember the acronym for the book, but that's like a really good book to help you prepare for like interviews. So generally like just sitting down in front of a whiteboard and going through some of those questions and just trying to explain the answer and your thought process. I think that's the most important part, so that your interviewee knows how you think and what's your problem solving strategy and how you approach things. So I think cracking the code interview and just asking other people, like other people are definitely your biggest resource, and cracking the code interview is probably your number 2.
Awesome. That's really, really great advice for pretty much anyone. Akil, what are your thoughts after doing, I think, about 5 different co-ops in the past 2 years?
Yeah, so like there's a lot of like other like resources that most people like don't know off like off the top of their head, especially like these small like first year or first and second year internship programs like Microsoft Explore and like Google Step, I think that's what it's called now. And like Amazon has like the Future program. Like there's a whole lot of like those first year programs that a lot of people don't take advantage of. And so looking for those opportunities are really beneficial. But there's also stuff like fellowship programs, which are not super common or really heard of. But like there's a lot less competition for it, and you can get into some really cool companies, especially like startups or like unicorn companies. So like 2 big ones are like the Kleiner Perkins Fellowship. There's like the Bessemer Fellowship, and there's also Hack New York Fellowship. And then those are the fellowships that I found really cool, and I got to participate in one. And I was really interested in doing like the other 2 as well, but I'm graduating in like a year, unfortunately. And then there's also Jumpstart. I found that platform really helpful when I was looking for internships as well, especially once you start having a couple internships on your resume. It's like a lot easier to like reach out to recruiters and like hear back from them as well. So making use of those 3 things would definitely like help you, especially when you're getting started, to try to find some more co-ops. I'll try to like add links inside like the chat so you guys can check those out as well.
Sounds awesome. I was about to ask if you could throw some of those names in there for people who might want to look at the chat later. All right, so moving on, what skills have our panelists highlighted when they were getting their first co-op experience? I know a lot of people think that grades are really important, so we are wondering, is that truth or is that not so much the case in tech? Is there something else that is more emphasized? So starting with Fuad, I know you've had a bunch of pretty big experiences, but how was it that you were able to kind of get your first co-op experience?
Yeah, so my first co-op experience was a research term at Toronto General Hospital, and actually grades mattered a ton. There was like a minimum GPA of like 3.9 to even like apply to the program I was at. So I will say that, it depends on the position. Like there are definitely, certain positions that require grades and like certain other positions that don't require grades. If you're interested in tech in general, tech really doesn't care about grades. My grades have definitely slipped in the past couple of years as I've gotten more co-ops and like been able to rely on like some of my experiences rather than my grades. And most companies don't even like check your grades now, or don't even require a degree. Like I met an Apple intern who was like 16 and like in high school. So when I was in the Valley, so like it really doesn't matter at all. But with that being said, I think research positions and a lot of fellowships do look at grades. And so if you're interested in those, I would definitely look at them. Going back to your question, sort of, you also asked about like what kind of skills I highlighted. And I think that will also depend on the position, but I think just showing that, you have, analytical and problem solving capabilities is kind of the key thing to stress, whether that be through, doing a ton of leak code problems, or that be through, side projects you've done that show, technical depth. I think that those are kind of the key things to focus on, and sort of the skills that you want to really, really highlight. And one thing that people like don't realize is that communication is extremely underrated. And not necessarily like, oh, can you be personable and like, can you like make the person like you? Although that definitely helps, and I've definitely employed that to some extent. I think the key thing is actually being able to communicate technical concepts really well. And so in an interview, what that means is, like not just being able to solve a problem, but talking through a problem as you're doing it and really guiding the person through what you're doing is really, really important. And one thing that helped me with that was just doing a ton of mock interviews with my friends who, which kind of forced me to think out loud and really think through problems as I did them. And I'll actually include a YouTube channel link. There's this guy on YouTube that does like really good like mock interviews on YouTube, and I think he's like the perfect interviewer. So I literally just tried to copy how he was interviewing for technical interviews. So I'll share that in the chat. But yeah, that's sort of kind of the skills I focused on, and a little bit of my view on grades.
Sounds like some pretty good advice. Bilal, what was your experience? I guess you've had your first co-op experience at a co-op. What were they looking for specifically? I mean, sorry, at a startup, not a co-op.
Yeah, so my first experience, so what they were looking for was really experience with their technology, just because like it's a very like niche type of technology, like AR, you won't find many like university students really working on it. So since I went to a hackathon and worked in VR for one of my projects, so I gained experience from that. So I would say if you want to get a very specific like internship in some place like AR, VR, something like that, get some experience developing with it, and that would make you really stand out since it's such it's a hard to access like type of niche. And one more thing that I would say for like grades aren't very important. From my experience, what I've seen is people either have really good grades. So a friend of mine just got an internship. Like for getting your interview, it really matters to have something that really stands out. So if you have like let's say a 12 on your resume, it's gonna be like it's gonna make up for a lack of experience, let's say. So it's either you have a lot of experience or you can have both too, obviously, but one or the other really helps out in getting noticed for the first experiences of getting an interview. I think that's it.
That's a really good point, to have something to stand out on your resume, whether that's marks or a cool experience or a cool extracurricular. That's great advice. Thank you. So our next question is for our panelists, how many co-ops did you have to apply to before getting your first co-op? And how many interviews did you have to go through before you were successful? In addition, do you have any tips from that experience in terms of how to apply to co-ops, getting interviews, all of that? First, can I ask Tasmia?
Sure. So in terms of third year, when I got my 16-month co-op, I actually had a lot more success than in second year when I was looking for a co-op. So specifically in second year, I did the thing where I would just apply to a bunch of positions on Oscar Plus, like over 100 of them, and maybe I got like 5 callbacks in total from that. And I finally did get one at the end, but I think the big mistakes that I made that I learned from, and in third year I was able to like get a call back in my first interview, was that I tried to say like the most perfectly articulate thing every time at an interview, and that would like make me nervous and jitter. And I think what I learned from that is rather than that, treat the interview more like a conversation, because not only do the employers want to assess your skills, but they also want to envision if they see themselves working with you. So if you would fit the company culture, and they also want to see that you're passionate about what you do. So not that you're just looking for a job for money. So that's where hackathons and extracurriculars could really come into play. And another thing is, instead of mass applying, it's really great to network. So Oscar Plus has a bunch of networking workshops and like mock interviews with that company's host, and that would be a great way to get your foot in the door of having someone even see your resume.
That's a great point. Thank you. Salman, what were, I guess, your tips in terms of applying? Because I think you've had a few co-ops over the years and you're about to start one in January.
Yeah, so I actually kind of remembered because it was kind of like, I was kind of curious. I planned to do multiple co-ops. So I was wondering how I would trend, how many applications I took. My first one at Mark, I applied to 80 places. I got one interview, and that was the job I got at Mark. OPG, I applied for 40 positions. And these are all strictly Oscar Plus positions. I don't know how many I applied outside of that. But yeah, OPG applied for that. Up until that co-op, I applied for 40 positions. I got 2.5 interviews, and I'll explain that later. And the University of New Brunswick, I applied for roughly 50, and again, I only had one interview, and that was the job I got. So I would say my strategy was, when I wanted to apply for a job, I knew what kind of work I wanted to do. I would usually filter through like, well, this is a job that sounds exactly what I want to do. I would literally take that job application, write down copy paste the exact job description onto a piece of paper. And as I was writing down, I could recall much better, oh, this is something I've done similar, or this is something I've done exactly. And here's what I could talk about. So I would just, like, as if it was lecture notes, write down the notes, and then in a different color pen, write down, I've done this in school, I've done this in extracurriculars, I've done this in co-op, another co-op, like, here's what I can talk about. And my strategy was to take, well, if this is the type of job I'm going to apply for, I'm going to find a really competent job application, make a resume based off that, spend like literally 3 or 4 hours on that one. And then as every other job application that seems nearby or close enough, I would adjust based upon that. So there'd be 4 or 5 core resumes, and then everything else would be adjustment of one of those. I figured that worked pretty well because it was a good mixture of quality and quantity, because you could pump out a lot of applications, but at the same time they're all very, they're lined up to at least something that's being demanded of a hiring manager, and hiring managers usually think alike. But in terms of like, I think like talking to friends and people, like I've received a lot of those interviews, because usually I would just get an interview and then that would work really well for me. And a thing I found looking back that worked really well is that your hiring manager, usually it's your boss that you end up working for, the first and the most biggest thing they'll see from you in an interview is like what passion you have. So if you really care about the work you're doing, or if you talk about some work that you really cared about before, they'll sense that right away, and that'll totally, like, it'll change the vibe of the conversation completely, and it'll make it friendly first and foremost. But they'll see you as somebody who really cares about what their work, and like they will have no question that like you'll do everything for your own satisfaction as much as the company's or the objective of the organization. How I basically answered all the questions. The OPG does behavioral questions, and I remember I wrote down my interviews for my first OPG, and they asked the exact same things. So when she asked my first question, I basically answered all subsequent questions, and I felt like it was a very poorly flowed conversation, but I ended up getting that job, and I found out a few months later that it was kind of like they knew they were going to hire me from beforehand. They just wanted to talk. They had to go through the formal process. But yeah, like even if you apply to a company multiple times, like those bosses talk, like that she basically planned to hire me before I even got the job. It was just because of the formal process. They wanted me to go through that. But yeah, like, and I guess speaking about like passion, like that really mattered the most in my last interview, because I'm working with electric vehicles, and they're like, oh, so well, you've done research beforehand. That's pretty good. And you've done project management, and that's pretty good too. And obviously I've done enough coding to like convince them I can code for them. But they're like, so what would set me apart in terms of like specifically like why would I want this job? And then I said like basically like this is like my kind of fun. Like when I'm not working on school, I'm working on my car and I'm working on programming for my car. Like it's a manual car, but I can still like plug in an OBD port and like make my own softwares. And then they're like, wow, you're doing the stuff we want to hire you for fun. Yeah. And then I got the call back in 2 hours. So if you, and like that has happened to line up really well. But if you can show in the interview stage that there's an aspect of your life, whether it be extracurricular, whether it be a personal hobby, that requires some like technical sense, some finesse, and like some reasonable, competent hard work. If you can bring that into the conversation, they'll see your passion, and it'll always. I can't say it's never gone bad. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you for all that advice. I think Akil, you wanted to say something quickly about what your thoughts were.
Yeah. So Yeah, so for my first internship at TELUS, I applied to like 50 companies, and then TELUS was the only one that got back to me. And then for my second one, it was pretty similar. I tried to like expand it more than just using Oscar Plus. And so then that time I used like Jumpstart and like applying to a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. I think in total I applied to like 250 and then heard back from like 10 to 20, but only got like 2 offers. So it's really just like a numbers game in my opinion, especially in the beginning. But then after my second internship, when I had like some more like legitimate names on my resume, I definitely applied to a lot less. And then I could like also leverage like contacts that I made like at the different internships, and then they'd give me like referrals, which made it the process a lot easier. So then when I applied to like Google, it was like a direct application, and then I only applied to like 2 places for that internship. And then for Facebook, I just like reached out to my friend, and then that was like the only person, that was like the only place that I applied to for that internship as well. So especially like once you build up your resume a bit more, you don't have to like apply as many places to get your internships. Also, I want to mention that especially people at Mac are really like nice in general. So you can definitely reach out to like upper years or people who are like alumni at like different companies, and like 9 times out of 10 they'll give you a referral and like try to give you like all the tips that they can to like help you get companies. So always try to like leverage your network, even if you don't really know them. They'll definitely try to help you out just because you're a Mac alum as well. So make use of that and apply to every place that you can.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. So our next question was, how do you manage your time between applying to jobs and schooling? What do you prioritize to be successful? So Alex, please.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because I think certain people might describe what successful is in different ways. So I think it's important to kind of understand what that means to you. But for me personally, I felt like school was a priority, but I always focused on kind of the other things that would set me apart, whether it's small little projects that I could work on or being a part of a group at school. And I think that was sort of how I let myself be successful. I focused on school, but I would say more on the other things, on the things that would help me outside of school and that kind of thing. So I would be applying to lots of jobs and studying at the same time, but also doing side projects and stuff. So it was pretty busy, but I think in the end, it's helped me a lot because if you focus, I think, a lot on your grades and your school, you'll start to tie your worth to your grades and focus less on what sets you apart.
That's a great point. Thanks for that advice. What about with you, Anna, doing in your first and second year? How were you able to prioritize what you thought was most important?
Yeah, for sure. So in my first year, I actually was really bad at managing my time. And that's partially because I started applying to jobs like so late. I don't think I started applying until like a month or like 2 months before I actually wanted like a co-op, which I think definitely was not something that reflected well on like, my grades, especially because I think I'm spending a lot of time applying to jobs when I probably should have been studying. And so I definitely wouldn't have rushed it. And so one of the things I did differently this year is that I tried to schedule my time, a lot more. So I write like all my tasks on Google Calendar, and I basically schedule times to apply to jobs. So for example, basically each day for a week, I basically spend an hour at night just applying to jobs everywhere I could find them. So like Indeed, LinkedIn, etc. And also I found that in order to like help me with the amount of time I spent applying on jobs, I also use like those other platforms like Jumpstart and like those auto applying platforms basically, where you just click, you send out your information, and then you'll just automatically apply to like a bunch of jobs. I found that really cuts down the amount of time that you have to spend applying to jobs. And in terms of what I prioritize to be successful, like I definitely prioritize school a lot more than I do for applying to jobs. But that's because like in the future, I do want to do like a combined MD, PhD in biotechnology. And so like for me, grades are really important. And for you, like they might not be as important, but definitely like if you're aiming for like grad school, like even if that's just a possibility in the future, I think it's definitely important to, at least keep like grades in the back of your mind, or sorry, I don't know if that's the right expression, but just keep in mind the grades that you might need in order to achieve that bare minimum that you need to get where you want to go. So if it's grad school, for example. And I think one thing that also helped me to be more successful was one of the things I knew going into second year and first semester of this year is essentially that when I was applying to jobs, I knew that it would take a lot of time based on my previous experience in first year. So I chose my course load to be relatively light. So the courses that I took, I thought that they were really relatively bird or easy. And so I thought that it really helped me have more time to apply to jobs because I'd finish up my courses really quickly because it was all stuff that I kind of, knew or was comfortable with. And so I'd have time every day in order to apply to jobs. And so I feel that that balance between my jobs and my schooling was pretty decent this year. Definitely a lot better than last year.
That's good. That's definitely nice that I guess you learned from that and found a way to get your Microsoft internship this year. Fuad, did you have some thoughts you wanted to put about how to balance jobs and school?
Yeah, I just want to make a really quick point about what Alex said. I think it's super valid that yeah, you can tie your identity to grades and your self-worth. But I just want to have a word of caution. I think a lot of people also do that with jobs. And it's really, really common, especially in the Valley. I saw it a ton where your entire identity is your work and getting good co-ops. And at Tesla, that was a big thing because we would work 100-hour weeks sometimes and things like that. And so I would definitely encourage in time management between applying to jobs and schooling to schedule in some downtime and really just focus on being an overall human being and not just a job machine or a school machine or a code monkey because those things are cool, but at the end of the day you got to kind of live with yourself and you don't want to just be a code monkey for the rest of your life. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But yeah, that was a great point by Alex.
Thanks for the advice there on really, I guess, the importance of not putting your self-worth into a job, because I think that as students, that's something that we really frequently do, which is kind of unfortunate. So we're going to do one more question here before we ask if you have any. So think of those while we answer this question here. But is there a more diversified skill set that you find to be required in a startup company as opposed to other tech companies or research? Can we start that off with you, Bilal, working at a startup company?
Yeah, so the type of skills you need, especially at an early startup, would be you would need so whatever the list on the job posting obviously would be the number one thing. But in my experience, what I was doing, I even ended up making a small mobile app to help with the whole CPR training. So if you have a lot of experiences, like different things that you have done, because I focused on mobile a lot previously, so I could use that in my internship and really help them gain an alternate perspective into solving a very, very odd problem and not have to learn a new framework or new technology or something like that. So it really helps with that. And I think bigger tech companies would be really specific in whatever you do. Because I've talked to a bunch of higher ups at Microsoft and stuff like that in networking events, and they've told me whatever is listed on your job posting or whatever you do is usually what you do because they already have a lot of personnel dedicated to doing things. So you wouldn't really need to have a really large skill set, but I think really good at whatever you're getting hired for.
Great point. Thank you. Tasmia, do you have thoughts on, I guess, what the skill set you needed when you were working your 16-month co-op?
Yeah, so as Bilal, in terms of the skill set, majority of your skill set should cover what the job posting requires. And they're a bit more specific in the languages you learn. I'm currently applying to jobs right now, and I've noticed that a lot of the bigger companies say the language specifically doesn't matter. You can learn that on the job as long as you know the base fundamentals of software concepts. That's fine. But in terms of my job, they needed you to at least know one of the languages, which was React.js or JavaScript, because since it's a small company, there's no onboarding program or transition period. You more likely just start working and you talk to your manager and whoever else you have to ask around yourself to kind of learn what you're missing and catch up. So you should have a bit of confidence in the languages you say you can do, but they also do give you the opportunity to learn the ones you don't. Like I didn't know React.js, and they gave me like some time to learn it and implement it on projects.
Great point, really focusing on the job description to make sure what skills you know when you walk into an interview. All right, so one of our questions from the audience was that one of the students is looking to do an internship at Tesla as a software developer, but the reality is that a lot of times the courses we learn at school don't really align with what people ask for at interviews. So they were wondering if there's any suggestions on how to get hired for a big tech company and really how to prepare yourself for those interviews. So we'll start off with Fuad since he actually worked at Tesla.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. First off, it's really cool that you have like a specific company in mind and like, you know, things that you're passionate about. With that being said, I would also encourage you to just like kind of broaden your perspectives and realize that like you do have this end goal, but there's a lot of ways you can get to that goal, and there's a lot of experiences you can have in addition to that goal. So I wouldn't get like super caught up if you get rejected from Tesla 1 year, for example. Like there's still a lot of things you can do to, you know, make yourself a better candidate and make yourself a better engineer. Because I think one thing to keep in mind is that you know, you're not grinding all this stuff so you can be tough because you like building things and you like being an engineer and you like working on cool problems. And so that's still possible even if you don't get an internship. So just a quick caveat. In terms of working specifically at Tesla, I think a big thing that Tesla does is it's not necessarily like Google and Facebook and some other companies where they have like a generalized interview. They interview team dependent. And so what that means is, you know, if you're working on a distributed systems team, like for example, which I did, you will get a distributed systems question when you interview. If you're working on a chassis control team, you will get a chassis control question in your interview. And so it's a little bit more specific like that. And so if you're interested in working at Tesla, I would really try and narrow down, you know, what teams you're interested in, what technology you want to work on, because Tesla works on a ton of different stuff in a ton of different formats. So that's some advice. And then in terms of getting, you know, better at things that aren't covered in your school study materials, I'm in biomedical electrical engineering. I had like 2 coding courses. One was like intro to Python, and like it was completely useless in all my interviews. And so like I would definitely say that the biggest thing is to just like, you know, get away from the mindset that school is going to like help you get a job, because it's probably not, unless you're in software engineering or computer science. Maybe it's a little bit different. But really encourage you to look online, try and like get your basic data structures and algorithms done. I did an online course to like kind of grab the fundamentals there, and then just honestly just practice a ton of questions. LeetCode.com is your new best friend from now on. I'm going to put the link in the chat, and you know, just doing as many coding problems as you can and really getting that interview experience is really important.
If I had to say one thing about, sorry.
No, sorry, go on.
So if you, people like, in that situation, you might read it as that, oh, they're looking for a clear answer on this specific problem, but more often than not, that's just a way for them to gauge like, how do you problem solve? And the fact of the matter is that if you have to get some specific tasks done, chances are anybody could Google it, but they're hiring somebody to solve problems of a wider range, and those problems they might not even know. Well, they probably don't know. That's why they wouldn't do it. But yeah, like saying that you don't know the answer to some problems that they can give you, that's okay. But you have to follow up with that, like, I don't know the problem, but here's what I do know. Here's my limited information about what I can figure out. Here's what I would do, and here's what I would do if this is a problem and you want me to solve it. I would like give him like a step-by-step breakdown, like how you would define the problem, how you would, you know, use the resources you have to eventually find out the solution. So even if you can't give him a straight numerical or practical answer on the point, you could give them, you could show them that you're a problem solver, and that's really at the end of the day, you're hired to solve problems.
Yeah, Solomon has a really good point. I just wanted to add on to this question because similar to Fuad, I'm not in like software engineering or computer science. So I felt that, you know, as a person who's coming from a very non-traditional background, like I definitely did not take many classes that were going to help me get a job. So the things that, like the steps that I essentially took in order to get interviews and to get my Microsoft internship was to do like a lot of code, but also to do a bunch of like different personal projects. So just doing my own, like just creating my own software and writing some of my code that would be used like just for my personal purpose, and not really for anything, like not for a class. or anything, but just something that I wanted to do to kind of demonstrate, you know, what I'm capable of coding and stuff that I'm capable of doing. And I see that somebody asked, like, how do I get involved in the personal projects that I worked on? And so the thing is, I had a friend we were in the same club, and essentially he was working on research relating to artificial intelligence. And so I was really interested in artificial intelligence. And so I was like, you know, can we talk about this? Do you want to chat? And so after the chat, he told me about this lab that he worked for that was doing artificial intelligence research. And so I essentially joined the lab on behalf of his recommendation. And so that kind of gave me a lot of different experience within like data science and artificial intelligence. And I think that especially if you're a student during the first year, you don't have a lot of classes, you haven't taken data structures and algorithms, I think getting involved in those different personal projects is something that will definitely set you apart.
I think she is frozen, and I'm guessing that her Wi-Fi broke out. Just want to make sure that is with everyone and not just with me. Okay. All right, cool. So we are at 7:02, which is technically past the end time of this panel. If anyone has, or anyone in the audience has any questions they would like to ask, / if panelists are willing to stay around, feel free to speak up, but the event is technically over, so if anyone does have to leave, that is perfectly fine.
Hello?
Hello.
Hey, so obviously there's sort of the general, okay, so to start off, obviously right now, COVID, it's tough to find jobs, it's tough to get interviews. People have mentioned networking and whatnot, but it's not even, so in my experience, I think in the past 4 months, I've definitely been leveraging things like LinkedIn and like messaging Mac alumni or even current interns or students. Sort of how could you, what kind of advice would you give for sort of sending a message to someone and getting a response? Not to say that I don't get any responses, but from time to time, and obviously at the same time, people, like, you're just not going to get every response, it's just the way it is. But sort of how, like, what kind of advice would you give to someone who is sort of trying to increase the number of people to engage with on LinkedIn?
Any of the panelists feel free to hop in and answer that question.
It could help if you do like personalized like message invites. Like you could be like, hey, I'm interested in you for X, Y, and Z reason. And then I know like when I get those type of messages, I'm more inclined to just like accept the request. And like if they have any questions, then I answer it then as well. And in terms of just like getting more callbacks, like on just hearing back more when you're like applying in general, I think getting more people to like look over your resume and then try to figure out like what aspects are like lacking and where you can improve on will be really helpful. Like for one big thing that I noticed in general when I'm like looking over resumes is like formatting stuff, or like they're not including the right information, or they're not like elaborating enough on the experience that they have. So just like taking those kind of things into account, and I think those two things will like help you hear back in general a bit more.
Thank you. I guess I'll just end off and say, hopefully I can hit some of you guys up, and I hope to hear back from you.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions from anyone in the audience? last call. So in that case, I'd like to thank every single panelist who came today to help out. If you have any additional questions for them, feel free to send them connection requests on LinkedIn. I think a few of them have sent their LinkedIns below. And also, if you got this event through LinkedIn, all of them were tagged. If you're interested, yeah, so I'd like to